What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Creepy for me. I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different and the stance was different and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person." They said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something wasn't right. Finally, I told the person to go home. They complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Totally could have been lying, but that whole situation just felt dark. Scared the hell out of me. I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple years ago. We had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans. I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This PC had its screensaver on, displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then from then of my eye, I swear to God, I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention and it was back to photos of a car show. As the day went on, I thought nothing of it and proceeded to continue my work until I was bringing another customer's PC to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral I could have sworn I saw a bloody body and bound in a trunk of a car. At that moment I began to freak out. I grabbed one of my employees, explained to him the situation. We then sat for 10 minutes and watched this screensaver. It is against company policy to search through the client's personal files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo, 2 bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods and another photo of a severed hand down in kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view this screensaver. We then felt that I would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes later, owner of the computer and another gentleman show up. I proceed to tell him that his computer is not ready and it will be a while. He then informs me that he was called there because someone reported there was some photographs of a grisly murder that we had found. I showed him his computer and then his partner then begins to laugh at him. Apparently he went against police policy and took some of his work home with him and had never noticed his work photos were being used as a screensaver. TLDR, a detective unknowingly brings me his computer filled with gory homicide pictures that get mixed in with his screensaver. I soil myself thinking I am dealing with a murder, call the cops, and the detective returns to investigate his own computer. I was living with my now mother-in-law in a house she had just purchased a few months before. We had all had various weird feelings or experiences in the house, but 2 really stick out. Collectively, there were 3 dogs living in the house at the time. One evening we are all sitting with our backs to the hallway, this is significant, watching a movie. All of a sudden my German Shepherd and my terrier both perk up their ears and start staring down the hallway behind where we are sitting. I mean, full attention. I notice and turn around. The light in the hall was off, it was dark, but of course don't see anything. 5 minutes later, they're still staring and now growling. This time my wife and I turn around and we both watch as the light switch on the wall gets flipped to on. Dogs went crazy and so did we. A few weeks later. Same scenario, light is off and we are watching a movie. My German Shepherd loved to play fetch and we always had a million balls around to entertain her. This time, she's staring down the hallway and wagging her damn tail. This time, we all notice again and start to watch. I swear to God, a ball, single orange tennis ball came rolling down the hallway towards her. We all went white. There were a few others, but Jesus, I hated that hallway. It never felt like a bad energy, but my feeble little brain was still scared nonetheless. Edit. One more story. My mom-in-law was having these dreams a few weeks after moving in about the house catching on fire and burning to the ground with us all inside. Horrible. About 3 weeks after these dreams we woke up one morning and distinctly smelled smoke coming from the house somewhere. Panicked, we all started searching and eventually came to the garage. On a rafter, we noticed a smoke coming out from around a fluorescent light fixture. At that moment I realized, my God, it's attached directly to this old dried out beam. The light was left on all night and it was clearly burning the rafter ever so slightly. Lights are not supposed to be secured/screwed onto a rafter like that. So we like to think our ghost hosts were looking out for all of us. After that, her dreams stopped. Thanks Ghosty. Not creepy, but definitely paranormal. I was about 17, and was in my bedroom crying my eyes out over something. Home could be difficult at times, and that evening I was really upset. I really needed someone to talk to, but the only phone in the house was downstairs where my parents were, so calling a friend wasn't an option. I didn't know what to do to deal with the crap I was trying to live with and really felt that it couldn't go on for much longer. I remember thinking, please, someone, just help me. Not a prayer as such, I'm not really sure if that does any good, more sort of a mental scream into the void. There was definitely no one in the room with me, it was a tiny room, and I had my back to a chest of drawers. And then I felt a something on my left shoulder, as if someone was standing behind me and resting their hand on me. I could feel the weight of each individual finger, and the palm cupping my shoulder, and I could feel warmth from it. It didn't scare me, but it was enough to stop me crying. I guess the feeling lasted for a minute or so and then just stopped. I have no idea what it was, but it was enough to calm me down. I wish I could feel it again. I shared a room with a guy in college who was a musician. He'd stay out late almost every night and come home around 3 or 4 in the morning. Our room was a straight shot through kitchen from the front door. One night I woke up to the bedroom door opening and figured it was just my roommate coming home after a gig. I thought it was strange that he turned the light on when coming in. He knew I was a light sleeper and would normally use his phone's light to shine around the room if he was looking for something while I was asleep. My bed was twin-sized, positioned against the wall connecting the bedroom to the kitchen. When he came in, I was facing the wall. I kept my eyes closed and pretended I was still asleep because I didn't feel like having a conversation with the most likely drunken friend while I was still half asleep. I heard him go to a side of the room, opposite of my bed, and rustle around his desk and dresser looking for something. Sometimes he would grab some clothes for the next day and go stay at a buddy's house, so I wasn't concerned. Then I felt him start reaching under my bed. I kept a few things under there, but he would normally ask before straight up taking anything of mine. At that point I was really confused and annoyed by all this, so I made it a point to aggressively roll over on my other side and face the middle of the room in the direction from where he was reaching, so he knew I was pissed that he was ruining my beauty sleep. Then I heard nothing. But I could feel he shot up from under the bed and was just standing there. I never opened my eyes, but I figured he would either apologize for waking me up or something. But he never said a word. He just stood there. After probably 2 minutes with the light still on, I heard him leave the room and go to the kitchen. I opened my eyes after a couple more minutes because he left the light on in the bedroom. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he had pulled a knife from the knife block and left it on the table. I checked around the house and couldn't find him, but quickly realized my Xbox, book bag, wallet, etc. were stolen. I called my roommate to see if he had been home, but he was miles away at a party. He still had his house keys and never gave them to anyone else prior. I must have accidentally left the door unlocked that evening, which was the one time someone decided to check the knob. Police never followed up with me after that night, so I doubt they ever caught the guy. I can't imagine what would have happened if I ever did open my eyes and see the guy standing there, or if I chased him out to the kitchen. TLDR, someone walked into my bedroom while I was still asleep, stole my stuff, and watched me from the side of my bed. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me as she wanted to see him as soon as possible. We were going down some dark, super lonely back road. I've never been that way before, but I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed, so we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. A very spooky, very generic horror movie train yard. Nothing crazy yet, except for the fact that it went on and on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road with a train yard on our left and a train on our right blocking the view. Eventually we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same roads. It wasn't there. We never passed a train yard. There were no trains on the tracks, now on our left. Friend's girlfriend and I flipped out. We swore up and down we drove right along the train yard for a long time. The drive home felt much shorter. We lived in a house a few years back, and random things would just go missing, then they'd turn up somewhere else. We never really thought hard on it cause they were never expensive or important things, so because of this none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and Mum loses an earring. Not a huge deal, but it's a nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high-traffic hallway. It has 3 doors at the end. Take a photo and show Mum when she gets back, give her back her earring and we discuss the oddity. I mention that lately I've been misplacing random inconsequential stuff like staplers, and she looks at me and she goes, "That's weird." Me too. Our housemate gets home and we mention it and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while and I found it back on my sink one day." So basically we're all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. I was 15-ish and babysitting a neighbor girl down the road from my parents' house. The house was older, but I never thought it was creepy. They also had this awful rat terrier that would bark at everything, worst dog ever. Once the girl went to bed, I sat in the living room and was watching TV. The dog started freaking out, but instead of barking at the door like normal, she started barking at the corner of the room. Then she would run to another room and bark and come back to where I was like she was following something. Finally she stayed at the kitchen barking for a solid 2 minutes. Afraid that she was going to wake the girl up, I went into the kitchen to quiet her down. When I walked in I froze and saw that every single cabinet door in the kitchen was open. All of them. I grabbed the dog and ran to the living room. After she stopped barking, I went back into the kitchen and closed everything. Thankfully the dad finally came home soon after. I refused to go back and my parents never believed me. I still get freaked out when I think about it. My boyfriend and I woke up in separate parts of the house in hysterics, naked and covered in sweat. When we both finally calmed down and talked we realized we had the same dream of being surrounded by a group of black and white people with no mouths. That's gonna be a no for me, dog. I am from the Indian town of Bhubaneswar. I have never quite believed in supernatural or anything outside the purview of science. This creepy incident happened the time my grandmother died. Being a traditional family we performed numerous rituals for her so-called heavenly abode to be pleasant. Most of these rituals don't make sense to me nor do they do now, but I decided against questioning as the timing was gloomy and everyone was mourning. One of these rituals was the preservation of lights inside a closed container. As part of the ritual her kids, which included my father, are supposed to make a journey taking her corpse from Bhubaneswar to the holy city of Puri, around 50 km, where the Jagannath temple resides, and her sons are supposed to burn her there, perform the puja and set the ashes on its path to the Bay of Bengal. Meanwhile there will be a container placed in our home in her room where she used to live, which will be filled with sand up to a certain level and a lighted earth, and the lamp is supposed to be put and the whole container will be covered completely, and the room is locked from outside for no one to enter the room till the sons arrive back to home and then unlock the room. Apparently there are supposed to be shapes formed on the sand which will tell the path that she will take to the heaven. I was also told that when my grandfather died the shape formed was that of a ladder, which was interpreted as him going to heaven in a ladder or steps. I of course thought all this was pure idiocy and didn't believe it. Cut to when my father and his brothers returned from the holy city of Puri and then the room was unlocked and the container was opened after that, and what I saw surprised and creeped me out. I could clearly see wheel shapes being formed on all the sides of the earthen lamp, called deep in my language. The wheeled shapes were not barely visible. I even took a photo. They were clearly visible. Grandmother lighting set up pic. It still creeps me out how that is possible. Edit. It was interpreted that she is going to heaven in a chariot. I don't smoke and I don't have many friends who do, but I keep several ashtrays at home, just in case. So, one day, about a year ago, I was looking for some papers and I found one of those ashtrays in one of the cupboards. It was completely empty and quite clean, BTW. I was pretty busy that day, so instead of putting the ashtray back in the cupboard, I just laid it on the kitchen table and went to do some repair work in the garage. I returned inside the house about an hour later, and the ashtray, still lying on the kitchen table, was filled with cigarette ash. No cigarette butts, just ash. I felt a faint scent of cigarette smoke in the house, definitely not as strong as I would have expected, judging by the amount of ash. Like I said, the ashtray was definitely empty and clean when I found it and put it on the table. I took a kitchen knife and carefully searched the entire house. Nobody was there. I checked all the doors and windows, they were locked. Then I searched the house again, checking was any cash or valuables missing, but it was all there. I called all my friends, even non-smokers, and asked them did they happen to drop by my house that day. They all said no. I also inspected locks for damage, but there didn't appear to be any. I changed locks, just in case, and had trouble sleeping for days afterwards. I actually stored the ash into the bag, and I still keep it in the drawer, just in case. Though I doubt it will actually resolve or prove anything. The day after that bizarre incident, a murder took place in my neighborhood. A mentally disturbed girl with a history of drug abuse stabbed a convenience store cashier to death, following an argument over a pack of cigarettes. It is very likely unrelated, but sometimes I wonder. I don't keep spare keys in the yard, in front of the door or anything like that, in case someone is wondering. Not sure if this counts as paranormal exactly, but it creeped me and my roommate out. So my roommate and I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a shared living space. I had just laid down in bed to go to sleep for the night and my roommate was still up in the living room doing schoolwork. It was almost midnight. As I'm laying there on my phone, I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I answer it, expecting a telemarketer. Hello? A kind of high-pitched man's voice answers, "Hey. Is this my name?" I should have hung up at this point. Yes, who is this? It's me, Derek. Remember, from high school? I was wondering if you wanted to talk? It's been forever. I went to an extremely small, rural high school, 100, and there was no one in my graduating class, or any class, named Derek. I said I don't know who you are, and as I'm hanging up I hear him say, "Wait, my name." Wait, but I hung up anyway. The fact that this person knew my name is really weird because, not to brag, but my name is really unique and I'm definitely the only person in my home county with that name. I went out into the living room to tell my roommate about it. As I'm telling her, she pulls up her phone and asks, "Was it this number?" She got a call from that same number at the same minute I did. She didn't answer the call and they left a voicemail. We listened to it and it kind of sounded like someone breathing maybe? Or just moving. And then distantly, at the end it sounded like a group of people yelling? Screaming? But it was distant. My roommate and I did go to the same high school, but we've changed numbers since we graduated and there shouldn't have been anyone but close friends, 1 to 6, people who would have both of our numbers. The area code was in our home state, but it was really far away from our hometown and we didn't know anyone there. Maybe I'm paranoid, but it really wigged us out. For the longest time, I thought I was haunted. Every day, every time I was alone, I'd hear something. It started out pretty innocuous, a few footsteps nearby or a slight rustling of leaves. But as time went on, it got more intense. The footsteps got louder, closer, to the point where I could feel someone on my heels. Bushes that used to lightly rustle 20 feet away were perfectly still until I was inches from them, at which point they'd violently shake like someone was jumping out of them. Naturally, this was freaking me the duck out, but then something changed. One day, I woke up to find a note slipped under my bedroom door. "Can we be friends?" At this time I lived alone, and you couldn't get to the outside of my bedroom without having keys for both the apartment complex and my unit. Nobody besides myself and my landlord had those keys. Not really knowing what else to do, I grabbed a pen and wrote back, "Okay." From then on, I didn't hear the footsteps anymore. No more rustling of leaves, either. But every now and then, I'd be thinking though something or talking to myself in my head, and I'd hear this wonderfully sweet little giggle. It never surprised me, and it never felt wrong to hear. Honestly, it kinda felt like when you'd make your crush giggle, there was the same warmth and satisfaction. Whoever this ghost was, we were friends. Over the next several months we became better friends, actually talked, and eventually started to see her. Supernatural, right? No, turns out I'm just mildly schizophrenic. Take care of your mental health, you all. As a child I moved around a lot, army brat, and I insisted that every house I moved to was haunted. Nothing major ever happened, just weird noises, opening doors, things being in places that makes no sense. It wasn't until my second year at uni that I clocked on that I was haunted, not the houses, after my housemate suggested it. Anyway, last year I was on the way to my uni house from my job at a bar at about 3 a.m. To get into the house you have to walk down a privately owned alleyway. Just as I reach the entrance to this alley, a man runs up behind me and spins me around. He's clearly had a bit too much to drink and starts trying to grab me, touch me up and convince me to remove my t-shirt. Naturally, I'm very uncomfortable and scared. I remember that the window to the house had an alarm that went off if the window was hit. I figured if I could get down the alley and hit the window, my 2 male housemates would wake up and help. Only issue, every time I walked down the alley he'd grab me again. After maybe 5 minutes of a struggle, the man hit me. Next thing you know, the alarm on the window goes off, waking up my housemates and scaring off the man. Next day the police were called. We gave them access to the CCTV footage at either end of the alley. The man was caught on tape, but since most of the incident occurred in the alley, there was not enough evidence to charge. Later that day, my housemates and I decided to check the footage to see what caused the alarm to go off. There was nothing. No bird, cat or any other animal. The alarm just went off. This had never happened before and didn't happen anytime after either. I'm convinced it was my ghost. It used to freak me out, but I'm kinda glad it's around now. When I was in college I house sat for my parents. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, so I locked every door leading up to the bedroom when I went to bed at night. I had the weirdest dream that someone unlocked each door and turned on every light. I felt cold and woke up to my dog barking. All of the lights in the house were on and every door open and unlocked. My dog wouldn't stop barking at nothing in the hallway. I sat in the shower with my dog and a phone the rest of night, scared to death. Shower? Bad choice there. Bit of a murder hotspot. March 2015. My father passed a month or so earlier. I wasn't sleeping well. I would be up later and later at night. My father used to always give me shit for staying up so late because it's ruining my sleep schedule and affecting my work. Standard parenting stuff. It's about 2:30 a.m. and I'm watching YouTube on my PS4. Power in the house flickers. I check the window, no rain or wind or anything. I figured somebody hit a pole somewhere. Couple minutes later, power goes out for a second, comes right back on. Nothing was affected. Which is weird because when power goes out, electronics reset. Check the window again. Still nothing happening outside. A couple minutes later, power goes out for almost a whole minute. From the couch, I can see the street light outside is still lit, as well as the other houses on the street. Power comes back on and everything is still as it was. Video continues where it left off, clocks haven't reset, nothing. It's now 2:37 a.m. I audibly said okay and went to bed. Next morning I wake up for work. The clock on the oven says 11-something am. My phone says 7:23. It was around 11 when my father left the house the day he passed. Fast forward to January of this year, 3-year anniversary of my father's passing. I can't sleep. I'm upstairs of my new home, watching Netflix. Power flickers and goes out. I immediately said okay, I'm going to bed. Power comes back on. Next morning, getting ready for work, oven clock says 11:41 a.m. Dad doesn't like when I stay up too late. Edit. Learn the difference between effect and effect. My brother and I were home alone one night watching TV. My mother was working a night shift and father was out. Father came home and pushed the door ajar and poked his head through to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Father closed door. 30 seconds after, another man opens the door to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Man closes door. We assume a friend of my father has come back to the house too. Anyway, about 5 minutes later I head into the kitchen where my father was, making dinner or whatever, and I'm expecting to see his friend again. I see that he's alone making dinner and assumed his friend was upstairs in the bathroom. I ask my father who his friend is. My father looks at me and asks me what friend? I reply, the guy who came back with you. Dad looks at me thinking I'm some sort of weirdo. He says I came back home on my own. Biggest what I've ever experienced. My brother was freaked out to the max. Remembering the man's face, he was pale looking and bright white hair. In the house I grew up in, it always felt like you were being watched. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye and dark mists that would dissolve when you looked straight at them. My older sister was always scared of the attic, especially. She would barricade the door when we were left home alone. I went in the attic quite often to get various things. It's where we kept large toy containers, old clothes and stuffed animals, and I just liked seeing what I could find. It always felt like I was being watched, though. One time I went up there, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a large, translucent alien-shaped white head looking at me from behind a box. I froze, terrified, and locked eyes with it for a few seconds before it slowly lowered itself down to hide. I turned right back around and left, telling myself I had imagined it, but scared to go in the attic for years after that. I didn't tell anyone for years. My parents eventually sold the house and we moved, and I've never felt the same way anywhere else I've lived. I used to have this reoccurring nightmare about this lizard man type monster who could see what I could see out of my eyes. So I'd run and hide and he didn't know where I was. But then as soon as I peeked to see if it was safe, he'd know where I was. So I'd have to leave that hiding spot and go find a new one, and then it would happen over and over and over again. A literal nightmare. Very Kafkaesque. But here is the real spooky part. I once mentioned the lizard man to my dad, and he got super white in the face and his voice was all shaky, and he just said, "This dream took place at our house in East St. Paul? The one with the apartments right behind it?" And I said yes. That's where I'd always go to hide. "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I have the exact same dream." And I don't know if it was just the way he said it or just the overall situation or both, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's quite chilling. One afternoon in college I came back from classes and decided to sit on the couch and have a snack. After that I just passed out. I had a nightmare of some bloody-faced demonish thing screaming in my ear at the top of its lungs. Woke up and went about the rest of my day. My roommate comes back later that night and goes into his room as I'm sitting in the main living area. At some point he lets out this random startled scream, which leads to me running down the hall to see what's going on. He looks at me and goes, "I swear to God, someone with a bloody face just walked from your bedroom into the bathroom." I never told him about my nightmare I had earlier in the day. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing ever happened again. Somewhat ironically, something happened to me last night. I got home from work very early in the morning, 2:30 a.m. My house has an entryway or mudroom before you actually get into the house. I open the front door, step inside, close front door, and proceed to try and find the key to get through the next door to get into my house. So the only light in this entryway is through the glass on the front door. The rest of the room is completely black and I can barely see my hands in front of my face. All of a sudden I start to hear this buzzing/vibrating noise behind me off to the right. House is old, so maybe just weird house noises. Still looking for the key when I notice that the noise is getting louder, closer, and it has risen in pitch to something like of a woman was humming loudly. Maybe it's just ringing in my ear. Out of the corner of my eye I see a shadow that I thought was from light reflecting outside, move towards me, creeping along the wall. That's when I noticed the vibrating noise was also getting closer to me, and it seemed to be coming in the same direction as the now moving shadow. I'm shitting my pants trying to open this damn door, and when I finally do, the noise stops, the shadow disappears, and I'm hoping it was all in my head. My grandmother's house had a very distinct smell. Nothing bad though, just a grandmother's house smell. Anyway, when she came to visit us she always used to sit in a specific chair in the living room. Shortly after she passed away, my father, my older sister and myself came home, and when we walked into the living room and we all smelled her. My dad said, "Hello Ethel," and the smell disappeared. I would be skeptical if just one of us experienced this, but it was all three of us. My grandfather passed away when I was 8 and my little brother was 2 or 3-ish. He had this big lazy boy chair in the living room that he always planted himself in. Everyone knew this chair was Grandpa's chair. Anyway, we went down to my grandparents' house in Florida for a long weekend to attend the funeral, etc. We're all chatting the first night there in the living room, and my mom was sitting in the lazy boy chair. My little brother goes up to my mom and says Grandpa wants his chair back. My mom asks him where Grandpa is, thinking he probably didn't understand death, to which he responds, "He's right behind you." My mom bolted off that sofa immediately. The very first hotel that I worked at, I started at the front desk and worked 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. There was someone there with me from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., so I always had a little more than an hour where I was alone at the desk. Our kitchen closed at 10 p.m., so usually by 10:15 p.m., it was only the bartender and I still there. One night, it was almost 11 p.m. and there was a huge noise that came from the kitchen area. The bartender and I ran back there and saw that every single pot, pan, ladle, spoon, everything else that was hanging from the ceiling racks, were on the ground. After our shift, we watched the camera back and there was no one in the kitchen when it happened. I have no explanation for it other than it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me and I could not get out of there fast enough. Earlier today I made a negative comment about Scientology related to their stalking, false imprisonment, and kidnapping on this r/AskReddit post. It was almost immediately removed. Then a few minutes ago I got an email from a random account saying essentially to knock it off. So, bye guys, we had a good run. When I was about 5 or 6, I was sitting on the back deck of my family home, an old farmhouse. I remember this old lady walking up the steps and going straight into the house without acknowledging me. I follow her inside to see who it is and my mom is standing in the kitchen room right off the back deck. I ask her who's here and she gives this confused look. Around that time, the original owner of the farmhouse died and I am 100% convinced it was her. Whoa, you ever see her again? A lady's voice coming from my closet asking for help. My closet door was cracked and she said, "Help me. I see you through the cracks." Every synonym for the word scared was coursing through my body. I went and checked to see if there was a woman in need of help, but nothing was in there but my clothes and shoes. This one isn't the worst, but it's always left me with a bad feeling thinking back to it. I used to live out in the country, way back almost to the end of a long dead-end road. There were only 2 houses that were actually lived in that far down, my dad's and the old lady at the very end of the road. There's my dad's house, and around it kind of off to the side were a bunch of old medium-sized barns/sheds. I used to let my cat out sometimes and she would roam around the yard, and come back up and paw at my window when she was ready to come in. One night I had done just that, but after a long while I got a little concerned. She usually only stayed out for an hour or 2 tops, but it had been way longer. I decided to go out and get her. I go out through the side door on the house and immediately felt off, like something was there. I needed to get my cat though, and if something was there I chalked it up to a raccoon or other critter. I grabbed the mag light and set off for the barns, calling for my cat. I found her huddled up in one of the barns, and she did not want to leave. It was like she was terrified of something, and was very stiff when I picked her up. I hasn't taken but 2 or 3 steps when this light shoots across the sky directly over me, illuminating everything almost like lightning. It made this odd whoom sound as it passed. My cat freaked out and started growling and clawing at me, which she never does. I actually dropped her because of it, and she took off towards the house as though she were running for her life. I did the same. I've never figured out what that was. I've read about comets and things like that, but nothing says anything about the odd noise I heard, or the reaction my cat had. It could have been something simple and explainable, but man did it freak me out at the time. Let me start off by saying that I don't believe in ghosts, yet I'm still scared of ghosts, if that makes any sense whatsoever. At our old house my cousin lived with us because he was a recovering druggie. He relapsed after a little. He would sleep in our basement and he had an Xbox and everything down there. I always wanted to sleep down there, but he had college a lot so I didn't want to bother him. After he moves out, he took his Xbox rip. I wanted to sleep down but was too scared. My sister said she'd join me sleeping down there so it was less creepy. This went on for about a week until I felt comfortable down there. After a few days of me being alone down there, I wake up very terrified of what seemed like nothing. Suddenly I start seeing about 10 or so black figures running towards me. They were coming from our staircase, so no way to nope out of there. I started screaming as loud as I possibly could. I think I temporarily blew out my voice for a few hours. I remember screaming for my mom, dad, sister, or anyone at all who would come to me. I was crying too. I woke up the next day and immediately ran upstairs and asked my mom if she heard me. My dad left for work already. She said that she didn't hear me at all. There are only 3 explanations I can think of. 1, I was getting bamboozled by ghosts. 2, sleep paralysis. 3, I was up too late and my mind was tricking me. I dropped my mug onto the floor accidentally. Heard no noise when it hit the floor, go to pick it up and it's gone. I honestly went to bed and pondered what happened and slept feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Edit. Jesus Christ, this kicked off more than expected. Obligatory thanks for the gold. And alas, I never did find the mug. Still bothers me to this day. First one was me and my cousins were in the basement playing video games while the adults were at the hospital for our sick grandma. The doors on the 3rd floor started shaking and the dogs were going crazy. When we went up it stopped and we got THR call our grandma passed. Second one would be when I was younger. I was at a buddy's and my mom called me to come home. I left on my bike and when I got home my family was crying and freaked out. I asked what was wrong and they asked me where the hell was I. I eventually looked at the clock and it took me over 3 hours to get home from my buddy's house that was like 4 blocks away. I still to this day have no idea what happened and don't remember the bike ride home. 20 or so years ago while living in NM. Driving east on Highway 60 at night between Vaughn and Fort Sumner. 2 of us in the car and noticed a really bright light on the right rear side. I mean really bright. We then remembered that the train tracks were there. So we kept driving without really thinking about it. Well, the light stayed with us, which was weird because trains usually don't go that fast out there. So, then my friend rolls down the window and looked back to see WTH it is, and suddenly the light vanishes. Also no sound. So now we're a little freaked. We pull over to check things out. Well, a new realization sets in. There are no train tracks next to the road on this section of road, 34.4866698, -104.776733. So, now we're really freaked out and bolt out of there ASAP. We told our story to people at work and of course caught some grief, but that's what happened to us. Edit. Sorry, can't get MapLink to work using my phone. Not paranormal but definitely creeped me out. I was walking home one evening and was up the road from my house, about 5 minutes walk away. As I'm walking I see this guy go up an alley, apparently not see something he was hoping to see, and turned around. We briefly made eye contact but there was nothing to it and he was walking really slowly. By the time I walked another 30 seconds down the road I looked back as I was turning the corner and he had only just emerged back from that alley. I'm now heading down the road leading to my street and there's a guy getting into his truck with his wife. The truck is facing up the street in my direction. He flashes his headlights which I didn't quite understand, then I hear a scuff behind me. The ducking guy from the alley is right behind me, like within arm's reach even though I heard nothing until he was right there. I'm pretty sure I visibly jumped upon seeing him so close, and he's walking like an absolute demon. I mumble a greeting out of pure reflex and start to cross to the other side of the road, removing my backpack in the process. He doesn't respond to my greeting or even look at me, he's just looking dead ahead like I'm not even there. He just starts running as soon as I moved. He bolts down the road and turns right into another alley, and I hear some banging on a wooden fence. As I walk past the alley about 30 seconds later I take a glance and it's empty. He must have vaulted a fence or something. Like I said, not paranormal or anything like that but it creeped me the duck out. I still don't know how that guy moved so fast to catch up to me in such a short space of time, nor how I didn't hear him. I've got pretty good hearing and he must have been sprinting to catch up to me. Weird shit. Edit. I mentioned the guy in the truck because it didn't occur to me until much later, but I'm assuming he saw how the guy was walking behind me and was trying to give me a subtle warning. Thanks, truck guy. Edit 2 for me and you. I'm aware that this is highly likely to just be some drugged up duckwit but the topic was paranormal or creepy, and to me this was creepy. Please stop telling me it was just a druggie. I know. Serious, what's the creepiest/scariest thing you've seen but no one believes you? Didn't see it but heard it. My friends and I got a cheap set of walkie-talkies from Walmart and were playing around with them in the middle of the day. There's a bit of silence as we're trying to figure out the volume and out of nowhere there's a male voice saying "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday" that comes through all of our walkie-talkies and it definitely sounds like it from one of those aircraft headsets. We try to answer back but there's no response. I called non-emergency but they said there weren't any reports of distressed aircraft or ships and even if there were, they couldn't do anything about it. Alternatively, a couple months later I saw a plane with an engine on fire go over my campus but apparently no one else did. Growing up, I had a friend named Adam. He was never able to come out during the day, only right before all of us kids had to go home for the evening. Adam lived a few houses over, in a house with an overgrown yard. I met his parents once. They were very strange, didn't smile, and obviously didn't want me there. I remember Adam telling me that he was sick, that's why he couldn't play that much. He was a small boy, pale with dark hair. Eventually, Adam stopped showing up altogether. And I eventually moved on, though I do remember going to his house a couple times to see if he could come play, and his dad just gave me this look before closing the door in my face. Later in life, I asked my sister if she remembered him. She doesn't, and according to my parents, that house was empty the entire time we lived there. I don't know who Adam was, I don't know why I so vividly remember him and his parents. As far as I can tell, he wasn't real, and yet I have perfect memories of him and his parents. When I was 7 or 8, I would have a reoccurring nightmare that one of my dolls came to life, played with me, and then would try to pull me into my closet with her. I'd follow her into the closet at first, but then she'd show me this little door at the back of the closet, and my heart would start to race. I don't know what it was about that door, but I knew something bad would happen if I went through it. I'd start to struggle and try to pull away, but the doll was too strong and would start pulling me through the door. At this point in the dream, I'd always wake up screaming. The worst part was I had night terrors, so sometimes I'd wake up standing next to my closet. Every night before bed, I'd make my parents make sure there wasn't a little door at the back of my closet. There never was. Anyway, I was talking to my mom the other day and this dream came up. I'm laughing about it and how ridiculously paranoid I was about dolls in that closet, but my mom gets really quiet. She tells me the creepy part of that dream wasn't the doll, it was the fact that there used to be a little door at the back of the closet. But when I was 1 year old, they remodeled the house and put a wall where the door used to be. There's no way I could have remembered that door, but years later, I kept dreaming about it. None of my friends believe this story, but I swear it's true. I grew up on a 2-acre home with plenty of trees and room for an 8-year-old to run around. Our house also was heated in winter by a wood fireplace, so we would periodically cut down one of our own trees to save money. Well, for about 2 years, there was a stump less than a foot tall near the house, and at least once a day, without fail, I would see someone standing on the stump. Usually it was out of the corner of my eye, but once or twice I looked directly at him. I always looked away quickly, 'cause it startled me and he was gone. But my sister says she experienced the same thing. Nothing ever came of it though. Were they truffle trees? Ooh. I have a story. My husband, then BF, and I were laying on his trampoline one night looking up at the stars and shit when all of a sudden a chunk of the sky starts moving/billowing. It looked like a green screen shifting, and had to be a few miles wide. We both saw it and still have no ducking idea what it could have been. It was a glitch in the simulation. Kidding, him not insane, I promise. Alright, buckle in. My neighbor was dying of a heart condition about 6 years ago. He knew he was, so he was giving away his valuables to people he trusted with them. Neighbor gave me his tackle box. He loved to fish. I would see him come home from fishing every day and he'd just sit on his porch and skin fish. I just put the tackle box in my closet and didn't really do anything with it since I don't fish. Anyways, soon after, he passed away in his home. Exactly a week after that, I woke up to the tackle box at the foot of my bed. Weird, but my stepdad likes to dick around, figured it was him, so I put it back. The next morning, I wake up, it's at the foot of my bed again. So, I asked my stepdad what the deal was, and he had no idea what I was talking about. To test this, I put the tackle box in a spot that he wouldn't find, nor would he attempt to get it. Under my bed, all the way in the back against the wall, and I put stuff in front of it to conceal it. Next morning, nothing. Okay, I guess it was him. Didn't give it much thought after that. 3 days pass, I wake up one morning and there it is, at the foot of my bed. Duck. Now I am starting to freak out. So I did what any rational person would and I went fishing with it. After I went fishing, I put the tackle box away, and it hasn't moved since then. It's still there. This happened to me last year and I fully understand why no one believed me because it sounds ridiculous. Every morning, I need to wake up at 5 a.m. to get the 5:30 bus to the train station to go to university. I had to be there by 8 a.m., but I like to get there half an hour early. To get to the bus stop, I have to walk down this bike path and under this bridge to get to this quiet back street road. There is duck hole light on the bike path. This street is dead quiet. The right side of the road is a continuation of the bike path, and the left is a normal footpath with a long green hedge. One morning, I was standing there waiting for a bus and this old woman comes walking out from under the bridge. I didn't see her at first because, as I said, it was pitch black on the bike path. She crosses the road and walks up to me. She asked me if I knew where X road was. I turned to point in the direction of the road she was looking for. I turned back and she was gone. This old woman who was walking at a snail's pace disappeared within 3 seconds. About 8 years ago now, I was taking a drive out to Kansas from the East Coast. I was with a friend and we were going out to see her grandparents. Once we were about 2 hours from the grandparents' house, my friend starts outlining standard operating procedures of seeing things in and around her family's home. She seemed a bit panicky when going over everything, but I managed to calm her down. I'm skeptical of everything and assured her that the things she had seen when she was a small child were just manufactured in her imagination. She insisted that the entire family had seen these things with the exception of her grandparents. 2 hours later, we arrive in Kansas and I'm ready to fall over because of the length of time the last leg of the trip took. We are welcomed and grandmother takes me to a back bedroom, and just as she about to close the door, she stops, says maybe you shouldn't stay in this room, and escorts me to another room. Okay, that was a little strange, but whatever, I'm tired. Fast forward to night number 2 at the grandparents' home. It's around 11 p.m. and my friend is crashed out on the couch watching TV. I'm in an adjacent bedroom from which I can see her laying on the couch. I nod off for the night and wake up to an old gray man that bared a resemblance to the grandfather but was not the grandfather, standing with his back to me in the doorway looking at my friend sleeping on the couch. I decided I was going to get up and confront the old gray man, and something slammed me back into the bed. I tried to get up several more times with the same result. Each time I was slammed back into the bed a voice would repeat, "Put a seal on the door." Finally, I snapped to it's 3 a.m. and everything was normal. I must have been sleeping. It was a dream. No old gray man and my friend was fast asleep. So I start pacing around the room trying to decide how I feel about what had just happened. I glance over to my friend, her eyes are open and she says, "You seen it?" I say, "Get in the car, I can't be here right now." We spend the next 4 hours sitting in a Walmart parking lot talking about the history of her experiences in that house and comparing to my own. Okay, my nerves are not on fire anymore and we are heading back to the grandparents' home. We arrive and they are waiting for us inside. I tell them exactly what happened to me and I get, "Yeah, that's strange. We usually do seal our doors with a prayer at night, but with all the excitement we just must have forgotten. All the children have mentioned stories of things but we have never seen them. We are sorry you had to go through that." I'm really not sure what I seen or experienced that night, but when I tell people they get that look of skepticism. It's obvious they don't believe me. My conclusion is that the experience was indistinguishable from reality in the moment. I don't know what that means, but it changed the way I look at things. Just after high school, maybe 6 months or so after 9/11, I was a van driver who drove the Meals for Meals on Wheels to the place where they get packaged up and taken for home delivery. Anyway, the delivery van only had AM/FM radio and I was listening to 92.5 FM, when all of a sudden the station cuts out and a transmission that I can only describe as an American version of a numbers station began playing. It was seemingly random numbers followed by a long period of the same phrase repeated over and over again. The phrase was, "They took the crosstown bus," over and over again. None of the other drivers heard it, but man was it creepy to hear. Eventually the regular radio station came back on and they never mentioned anything about it. The scariest thing I saw was at the age of 16, I woke up early in the morning, 4:35ish a.m., me and some friends were supposed to go on a road trip for the weekend. We had a long AF ride to one of the stops we wanted to visit, and didn't want to be there too late. I look out my window and it's still kinda dark outside. I walk downstairs and see wet footprints all over the house, and suddenly a big man, like 6 feet 7 inches. I was around 6 feet 1 inch at the time, just bolted past me and out the front door. Not really creepy, but I shat at least 5 bricks and bolted upstairs to my dad. Nothing got stolen, but things were scattered all over the house. This was 4 years ago. As I was walking on the sidewalk on a busy afternoon, I saw a suspicious boy/man about 18 yo. He was 10 meters away and walking what it looked like towards me. I kept my eyes on him despite the fact that he wasn't looking directly at me. His eyes were roaming, jumping from an object to an object. As we approached one another, half a meter away from each other, he takes out a knife and tries to stab me in my left side. He wasn't really fast, so I easily dodged it and immediately turned to see who is he, or if he is trying to stab me again. To my surprise, he continues walking and after a couple of meters he stops, turns around, smiles and gives me thumbs up, then he continues walking in the opposite direction. Till this day I don't know who he was, what he wanted, and even my family doesn't believe me, because if someone wanted to stab you, you can't stop him. You aren't experienced enough to dodge it like that in something of that kind. Edit. Thank you for the rewards. Those are my first ones, so I don't know what do they do. Thank you. Once saw a giant fireball in the sky. It was enormous, bigger than anything I've ever seen, and kept going north across the hills in the horizon. Turned around to talk to my neighbor who also saw it. We had no idea what we were looking at, but suddenly it was gone. We're talking deep impact size right before it hit Earth. We all should have been dead. Don't know what the hellfire this was, but I know what I saw. Around summer 2001. I spent one summer in high school living with my aunt and uncle and keeping their 7-year-old daughter for them during the day while they worked. I was up late one night watching TV in the living room. The living room was right off of the kitchen, separated only by an L-shaped bar. I saw my cousin, out of the corner of my eye, walk down the hallway from her room into the kitchen. It was way past her bedtime, so I told her she needed to go back to bed. When I didn't hear her answer, I got up and walked around the bar and into the kitchen. There was no one there. I checked under the bar to see if she was hiding from me, and there was no one there, and nowhere else she could have gone from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway to her room, and she was fast asleep, snoring, so there was no way it was her. It baffled me, and freaked me out, because if I didn't see my cousin, who was the little girl that walked into the kitchen? Several years later, I was talking to my aunt and she nonchalantly brings up the ghost in her house. I laughed it off and she said, "No, I'm serious. We have a ghost. Your uncle and I both have seen her and heard her. We call her Giggles, because we hear her giggling. We usually only see her in the hallway before she disappears. All of a sudden, I remembered the disappearing girl in the kitchen. I asked her what her ghost looked like. She said she had blonde hair with braids and wore a white dress. My cousin is blonde. On the night in question, I thought I'd seen my cousin in a nightgown walk down the hallway, but apparently it was the ghost that resides in my aunt's house. I woke up to something. It sounded like a door shutting. At first I thought it was a dream because I could hear it in the dream as I was waking up, kinda like when someone calls your name when you're dreaming. But then I looked at my cat. His hair was completely standing up and he was beaming at my bedroom door. This was the moment when I got really scared. I know animals can pick up on that shit, and I thought he might know something's wrong. My cat doesn't do this type of thing unless a dog is in the room. So I looked over at the door, and the only way I can describe it is it looked like it was swaying, slowly, like it was breathing, like someone was standing on the other side of it trying to hear if I was awake. This swaying was accompanied by a shadow. I don't mean a supernatural shadow, but it looked like the shadow of a person behind the door. I was paralyzed in fear. I lied there for 5 minutes naked watching this door away. I considered yelling and trying to scare them away, but I was terrified someone might respond. I legitimately thought this was the moment where I will have to defend myself or be killed. I don't own a gun, but after 10 minutes or so I mustered up the courage to check every room in the house. I ducking checked every corner too. But there was no one there. I don't know what happened, but my evolutionary traits kicked in and I completely believed someone was outside my door. Edit. The accompanied by a shadow part was not a shadow figure, it was like the shadow you'd see if something was on the other side of a cracked door. I don't know if that makes the story less scary or what, but just wanted to be clear. As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut bombing memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veterans cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery, in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are, when I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel my hair beginning to lift as if there was an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush and what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue, like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once. Needless to say, I freaked the duck out. I screamed like a scared little girl and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to relieve me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift in the cab of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed in his truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the grave. During the day, of course, as I suspected, in the light of day it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hands over the stone and checked to see if maybe there was some sort of hidden light source or solar panel. But no, it was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone. The humming was gone, too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary. I never learned whose grave that was, either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, and I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my tired brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was real, a ghost or spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was malevolent at all. 2 stories here, both about my grandma. Near the end, my grandma had trouble controlling her bowels, wore a diaper and would typically go all over the toilet. After she passed in the house under professional care. My family cleaned out the house, took the wallpaper down, cleaned the place spotless, because we were going to move in the next month or 2. About a week after we finished cleaning, we went back to make sure everything was good. We get to the bathroom my grandma used and there was literal shit everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, behind the shower curtain, literally the entire bathroom was essentially coated. Freaked me out because I knew it had to be my grandma, no burst pipes or anything wrong with the plumbing. Second story, we ended up moving in after the situation. My parents were out of town, so my brother and I had some friends over. We were in the basement playing Magic the Gathering when I went upstairs to grab everyone drinks. In line of sight from the fridge was the TV in our family room. Out of nowhere the TV turns on full volume to the show The Commissioner, which was my grandma's favorite show. She was also hard of hearing, so it being at full volume was normal for her. I freaked the duck out and ran into the basement to get my brother. We go upstairs and the TV is off but the recliner is reclined. I shouldn't have been scared because it had to be my grandma, but I young. We lived in that house a few more years and a few other things happened, but those two stick out to me because they were so close to when she died. I saw a panther-sized black cat darting out of a water retention/artificial forest near a school in the desert. Logically, it shouldn't be able to survive there, but holy shit, I saw it. Animal control wouldn't let that exist. There isn't really food enough for it, and the summers get dangerously hot if you've got black fur. Must have been 4 to 5 feet long. It doesn't make sense, but I 100% saw it, and so did the friend I was with. East Coast US here. For years we were told cougars don't live here. Local trail cams disagree. Life, finds a way. Edit learning interesting cougar facts. Thanks guys/gals. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night. Uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going into work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the AM. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had, no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. Not quite sure how young I was at the time, but it was probably between 5 to 8. I was in my babysitter bed at the time in her trailer park. It was 3 AM. I had woken up because I had to pee. When I woke up I looked down the hallway to see my babysitter leaning against the wall like one of the stereotypical cool guys do in movies. And I made eye contact and I felt my body go cold because she was still sound asleep next to me in bed. I went under the blankets trying to hide, and when I looked back she was gone. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I've never told anyone. I just sat in her bed watching infomercials until 6 AM when she woke up. Never even thought about sleeping there again. I honestly forget how much this affected me until I started writing this. Really freaked me out, man. Edit, since I never told anyone I'd if it belongs here, but no one in my family believes in ghosts, so if I were to tell them I guarantee it'd be dismissed. I was walking to class from the dining hall on my campus when I saw a lady yelling for help and banging on a window of a nearby building. Lots of people were walking past, but I was the only one who seemed to acknowledge it. I went to the window to help and she told me she was locked in a room in the building and that she needed me to come in and open the door. Now, I have no idea the layout of this building and where she was located. So I decided to call campus security for help despite her pleading with me not to call them and to just let her out. I call them, and when I hear them coming I go to greet them so I can take them to the window. I leave for maybe a maximum of 15 seconds and when I return with campus security she is gone. We can't see her at the window and campus security goes inside to double check, and sure enough there is no trace of her. Campus security definitely thought I was crazy, and I'm sure my professor thought I was full of shit when I explained to him why I was late. No one seems to believe me that this happened, but I swear it did. Facts. I am female / it is a very old campus with lots of random historic buildings that people don't really use, and this building was one of them / the area has a very high crime rate, so it probably was a robbery. Okay, so I was flicking through these and told my girlfriend about one and she hit me up with these stories. Just some background: she is a dedicated science brain and not superstitious at all. When she was growing up, 4 to 15 years of age, she would often wake up in the middle of a disturbed sleep to see an old woman perched at the end of her bed. This woman was not someone that she recognized. The old lady would soothe her back to sleep, often patting her feet at the end of her bed. The strange thing about this is her sister, a few years older, also had similar experiences seeing the old lady. They both shared a room, but would see her at different times. We doubt very much it was someone coming into their rooms at night. Both her and the sister also recalled seeing a man popping his head out from behind their tall kitchen cupboard, smiling and then going back behind it. Turns out that from his description the family believed it was a neighbor who passed away and used to play hide and seek with them and his children. Personally, I've never experienced anything supernatural. Found reading this thread and talking to her about it very interesting. Smile. Edit. Thanks for all the votes and comments. One of my first big posts on Reddit. Great seeing the love. We both woke up all giddy. My GF divulged further that the house they lived in used to be owned by an elderly woman who kept it super clean and was a very caring member of the community. Apparently she died 3 days after Hay signed the lease. Not sure if it counts as creepy or overall scary, but it was weird. Back in high school I lived in a large apartment complex. It was maybe around 8 to 9 at night and completely dark. I was with a group of friends, 4 or 5 people. We were just talking and messing around with a friend's pair of walkie-talkies as we decided to look up in the sky as 2 fireballs, or what can be described as fireballs, just appear in the sky and slowly move in a line. Just as that happened, we started getting what sounded like military communication over said walkie-talkies that was really static, but words came in every now and then. About 10 or so minutes later the fireballs disappeared and the communication cut out. There was absolutely nothing about this on the news the next morning, and no one ever believed me. Edit. The sky was clear, no clouds, and the only military base in my whole state was 30-ish miles away. Luke AFB. Had my laptop in my bed just before going to sleep, not plugged in, on battery. Made an offhand comment on some website about how I wasn't scared of ghosts and didn't believe in them. Then I turned it off and went to sleep with the laptop beside me in my bed. Next morning when I try to power it on, nothing happens. But the laptop feels unusually light. That's when I realized the battery had been physically removed and placed in the kitchen. I was alone in my apartment and do not have a history of sleepwalking at all. Footsteps and banging in my attic. For about 2 months, almost every night I would hear from my attic. The steps are only like 5 feet from my room, small taps or footsteps. Then it gradually got louder to the point it sounded like an audible foot was pressing on the wood. I told my dad and he told me it was probably an animal that got up there or something. Thing is, my sister heard it too, as her bedroom was in the same hallway as mine. My dad might have been right, as it was completely gone after 2 to 3 months, and right now at 2 a.m., I don't hear it. And I swear to God if I hear it after I post this I'm actually gonna piss my pants. Edit. A commenter also reminded me that about 3 times I heard a loud bang, like something knocking really loud on the roof. My heart would skip a beat when that happened. I'm so ducking relieved whatever was up there is gone now, or else I felt like I would have gone crazy. No one ever believes me when I tell them this except the few people that are involved. My dad thinks we are just too imaginative, even though my mom and I will tell the exact same stories at different times, never having talked to each other. But anyway, here's what I have to contribute. It's a copy and paste BTW. I've told this story on Reddit before. My story starts when I was roughly 8. My parents bought an old farmhouse that's over 100 years old. We found newspaper clippings in the wall when they renovated it from 1864. I had 2 brothers at the time and we were all outside playing, and they had a tendency to pick on me, so I decided I was done putting up with it and went in the house to tattle, as year-olds do. I yelled several times for my mom and finally got back. "What is it, dear?" Not seeing her, I yell, "Where are you?" Again I hear a voice, "I'm over here, dear." I don't see her and call out again. This repeats about 4 times, and as I get closer and the voice gets louder. I passed by a window and glanced out to see my mom and dad out in the distance working on a tractor. My heart jumps into my throat and I book it outside. My brothers are exactly where they were when I went in, so I know it's not one of them messing with me. Throughout the years I hear voices and TVs and strange noises constantly throughout the house, but just assume I'm hearing things move up a bit. To me being 17. Parents left town for a few days and I had some friends come over. Night starts off normal. We play some video games and all is well. 2 of my friends need to use the bathroom, so one goes downstairs and one stays upstairs since there is 2 bathrooms in the house. First friend comes back from the bathroom and says, yes, really funny guys, to the 3 of us that are in the room. We have no idea what he's talking about. He said banging on the door and making weird sounds while I'm taking a piss, so funny. We are all genuinely confused as we haven't moved. He doesn't believe us but sits down and rejoins the group. Now the second friend comes back from downstairs and has a similar complaint. He says we were bouncing a ball, shuffling things around, laughing outside the door, and heard us run off when the toilet flushed. We again are confused, especially since there weren't enough of us to mess with both of them at the same time. Conversation kind of drops but neither seem convinced we did nothing. A couple hours go by and for some reason the conversation comes up again. We deny it, they DPNT believe it. Eventually that turns into jokes about ghosts and how we disturbed them when the house was remodeled. I was about 13 when we started remodeling. Jokes continue and someone said, "Ah, come on now, you can't really believe that ghosts exist?" And everyone is like, "Nah, they probably don't." On the other side of the room is a single fold closet door, and right as we said that, this door explodes open so violently that the folds slam together and bounce almost back shut. We immediately end that conversation, flip every light in the house on, and no one dared to touch that door. The next day I wanted to make sure something didn't fall. But as I open the door, there is nothing close to the door, nothing big enough that even could have fallen to slam that door open. Move forward to me being 20 and telling my mom of the weird things that I witnessed. She tells me, "Oh, I know Darius, at least a family of 3 that I know of. 2 little boys, one always has a bouncing ball and the other giggles a lot, and an old man." I hadn't even gotten to that part in my story. Edit, dear cause, apparently this is a hot button issue for you all. About a decade ago, I was helping my sister and her husband move into their new apartment. It was in a far-off city, so I couldn't exactly drive home right after we were done, and their place was also pretty cramped. I decided to spend the weekend at her friend's, who I'll call Mary, house for my bus back home on Monday. Now, Mary is a widow. I'm also a guy. Keep that in mind. When I first got to Mary's house, I was immediately hit by how unwelcoming the place felt. She was really nice, but the house just felt angry, as if I was an intruder. The building was also ice cold despite it being summer and there being no AC. It was off-putting to say the least, but I just chalked it up to nerves. Mary starts to show me around the house, but a feeling of profound unease begins to steadily creep up on me, starting right in my gut. Something is seriously off about this place, but I don't know what exactly. One room was her husband's study. It looked completely untouched since what I was guessing was the time of his death. Files, books, computer and keyboard, pens and pencils, and even a coffee mug. All of it was covered in some serious dust. The room didn't look exactly ominous, but it was certainly bizarre. She finally leads me to the guest room and I start to get ready to turn in. It's about 11 p.m. I leave the one luggage bag I brought on the floor, change into my pajamas, lay in bed and try to get to sleep. A few hours later at about 1 or 1:30, I wake up to what sounds like footsteps. I don't worry too much about it, thinking it's probably Mary on her way to the bathroom or something. Then something hits me like a brick. These footsteps are far too deep and far too loud to belong to Mary. They sound like the footsteps of a bigger guy. Now, I'm sweating bullets, but all I can really do is stay still and try to go back to sleep. For a good while, all I can hear is the steady pacing of a large man just outside the door. I swear, at some moments it felt like whatever the duck it was walking right into the room. I eventually fall back asleep. I wake up again at about 3 or 3:30. This time it felt like someone or something was pinning the covers from below the bed so that I couldn't move. I'm terrified and almost paralyzed in fear. After a few moments of struggling, I manage to get the covers off and then the bed starts to violently shake. I grab my phone and ducking take off. I hustle down the stairs in my PJs and call a taxi to get to a hotel since I'm way too spooked to stay any longer. Once I get off the phone, I quickly go back into the house to get my stuff from the guest room. I will never forget what I saw next. As I open the door to my room, to my total and utter horror, I see that my luggage has been carefully placed on my bed, opened, and the contents have been completely strewn about. I practically shit a brick, scramble to get my stuff into my bag, and sprint out of the house. I haven't been over at Mary's house since. Edit 1. Formatting, spelling, and some extra deets. Edit 2. I never spoke to Mary about this in detail, but she did ask me why I left in such a hurry. I told her that I couldn't sleep since the house was so cold. She clearly wasn't believing me, but we both just silently agreed to let it slide. I'd later find out from my sister, who I also did not tell very much to, that Mary's husband had killed himself in the guest room. I guess this isn't super scary, and I'd if it really fits, but it still weirds me out and my friends just think I'm crazy. Back when I was a freshman in college, I went out with a friend of mine. He ended up dancing with some girl, So I went and grabbed a seat at the bar. Girl came up to me and bought me a drink because she liked my style and introduced herself as Sapphire. We chatted for at least an hour, had a few drinks, and at some point she said she had to leave, so I asked for her number and she scribbled it onto a bar napkin. But then we ended up chatting more and one thing led to another and she invited me to her apartment. We go there and start hooking up and she asks if I've ever tried acid and if I wanted to do some. I said sure. After it kicks in we go for a walk. We were talking about the constellations in space for a while, but then I noticed she got quiet. I had my eyes glued to the sky for the entire walk, so I look over. And she's gone. I freak out and start retracing my steps to get back to her place, yelling her name and checking bushes. My high ass assumed she was just peeing in a bush. Get back to her apartment, knock on the door, and some guy answers the door. Keep in mind this was like 4 a.m. at this point. Some guy answers and I ask if he knew Sapphire and described her. He said he had no clue who I was talking about and to just go home. So I did. I ended up crashing at a friend's place because my trip was going south and I knew he'd be able to calm me down. Next day comes and I'm still trying to figure out what happened to her. I call the number she gave me. It was disconnected. Went back to the apartment, same guy answers, still no idea what I'm talking about. Even knocked on some of the neighbors, and tried the same room location on different floors. Nothing. Talked to the security guy at the front desk, said he remembers me coming in a few times, but never saw me with a girl. Called up my friend who was at the bar with me and asked if he saw the girl I was with. He said he never saw me with a girl. According to him I was sitting at the bar alone for a bit, had a few drinks, and left after like 30 minutes. I have no idea who this woman was, or if she even existed, but I remember her so vividly I can't believe that I imagined it. She just vanished. I have no tangible proof of her existence. Freaks me out to this day that I spent an entire night with this person who didn't exist. I still don't know what happened that night. I was at this scene of a suicide, work-related. Guy shot himself with a shotgun, right under the chin. When I walked in, a black cat was sitting in his blood and staring at me. Really weird. Edit, for the ones calling bullshit, that's cool lol. The wife called us. His wife and kid came running out of the house past me as I got there. The detectives came out after the fact. And it was his own cat. That's some Linkian shit. This may be long and it isn't a no one believes me / a scenario due to the amount of us involved, more of a lot of skepticism thing. Backstory, you'll need it. I grew up in a small California desert tourist town called Joshua Tree. Home of the Joshua Tree National Park. Those of us that are older call it the monument as it was that before national parkdom. I was in my early 20s at the time of this, which was approximately 14 years ago, and was the only one with a car and a license. Growing up in a small desert town leaves you a limited options for fun and we would make use of the park. Occasionally, maybe once a week or so, a group of us would pile into the station wagon with beer, smokes and a mixtape and drive through the park late at night. An empty road, so dark and quiet other than the loud group of guys in a red Mercury driving fast from one entrance to another. Hours would go by each time as we drove the long desolate road and stopped at various rocks we liked to climb. And I can't understate how desolate it was. How alone. No other cars, no lights. Except the occasional road work sign when warranted. Hell, that was exactly what we thought it was. This trip started like every other, except maybe more of us than usual. Crammed in that car, windows down as I chain smoked and drove a good 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, gravel spitting up as we had a good time. Shortly into the trip I saw a light. A blue light. Possibly, and it was, miles and miles ahead. That is the thing about dark, light is free to shine. I remember saying something about having to slow down at some point ahead, must be some road construction left by itself up ahead. Had to be a sign, the light hadn't moved. We continued for a few miles to one of our favorite stops and got out. We climbed for a while, maybe 45 minutes or so. Drank a little. Joked. The norm. Then we piled back in and continued. Let me be clear, this light never moved and we had already been about an hour into our adventure. Why would a sign have a blue light? As we approached the light I started to slow. And slowed more and more as we approached the source. It wasn't a sign, it wasn't a car, it wasn't a UFO. Standing on the side of the road, facing towards us unmoving for over an hour at this point, was a man. A pale white man, white beard, dirty old miner clothing with an old mining helmet and a pickaxe. His light giving off an unnatural blue light. His face blank but he stared at us, directly at all of us. We sped up and as we drove by faster, his head turning to keep pace with us as we left. His light visible, unmoving once again, facing us the entire trip out. I remember looking at the car clock shortly after passing him. It was damn near exactly 1 a.m. when we passed him. We never saw a car, hell, a horse, anyway for this old sickly pale miner to get into the park, nor any reason for him to be there. Worst of all, we estimated that this miner had to have been standing there, facing us, for at least an hour and a half never moving. Not once did that light flicker as if he looked down for a moment, or turned his head. He just stood there staring down a road at a car full of dumbasses. We never saw him again. However, a couple of years ago I decided to check to see if anyone experienced the same. I found one other story of a couple that saw him near where we did. Standing there, staring late at night. As a man, I wish we would have stopped. Even if it would have been the most horrifying thing ever, I wish we would have stopped because I honestly believe there was a ghost of a dead miner out in that park and I would know for sure today. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.